Good morning, everybody, and a happy Sacred Sunday to you. Now, that's applicable for all of you watching live, but I want to acknowledge all the people that watch this replay. So, even though it's called the Sacred Sunday Show, a reminder we can make any moment, any day sacred by choosing appreciation and gratitude and to see the divine in all. Now, it's easy for me to be grateful and see the divine in my guest, TJ Woodward. Because I have the greatest of respect for him. And this is the third and kind of final part of our series we started. We're doing one a month. I'm really working on the hard stuff, how to deal with the biggest challenges. And I love having TJ on that because I so respect his approach to the hard moments and hard challenges we face in life. So you're going to hear a lot from TJ, and we're also going to play the final part of the video interview that we did with Reverend Michael Beckwith. So welcome. If you want to come on into the Zoom room, that's a really wonderful way to connect directly with us. And I do want to welcome, I see that we have some of our favorite people in our Zoom room already. So welcome Bonnie, Dia, Nancy, Patricia, Ruth, Tamala, and anybody watching on Facebook, come on in. I will post the Zoom room in a moment. I'm going to start us off with just a brief meditation, and then I've got a question to ask TJ, because I really want for you to get his wisdom today. But let's just start by turning away from our devices and closing our eyes. And let's just start with breath. Breathing at your own pace. Just letting my voice gently guide you. And as we breathe consciously. Actually, putting our attention on the inhale and on the exhale. And as we exhale, we release, we let go, including letting go of any thoughts or belief systems or stuff that just doesn't serve us anymore, or that's not ours. And on the inhale, we imagine the prana, we imagine the life force coming into our body and the blessing of life, the blessing of the life force. So we consciously breathe and we allow ourselves to experience the cycle of life, contraction and expansion, expansion and contraction. Life coming in and life moving out and on to something else. And I invite you to perhaps make an intention for your time with us today. Even if you're watching the replay. What's a challenge? What's a problem that's in your world, in your life, that you really want some support for, some help, a tool? And I'm trusting that TJ and I are going to be connected to all that is and provide those tools, those practices, perhaps even just those ideas that are the next step in your evolution, the next step in whatever you're working on. So bless us all that we may be clear channels for spirit to flow through, supporting each other in this incredible journey of life as we leave the world of right and wrong, good and bad, blame, shame, judgment and criticism. That's the world we're leaving. And entering that beautiful world of conscious awakening, presence to what is, gratitude for every breath. Aho. Shay. I see that our Zoom room has grown. Welcome, everybody. So I'm going to put the spotlight on TJ. And TJ, if you haven't heard before, he's the author and the creator of, I'm going to say the conscious books, because he started with Conscious Life and Conscious Recovery. And there's a new conscious book coming out, which I was just seeing on Facebook. And really, truly, TJ understands what it takes to really live life in a conscious way, because he walks his talk, and he's a wise and fun fellow. So it's wonderful to have you with us, TJ.
Thank you,
And
Scott.
my question for you, and it's a big one, is how do we shift from being run by guilt, shame, and I should do this and I should do that, into really consciousness, whether it's conscious choice, conscious decision making, or even conscious recovery?
Well, thank you. I love that. And as we were meditating, it's fascinating to me, and yet not at all surprising that that is exactly what was emerging for me. That question of how, in a world, and you named it in the meditation, in a world where we are filled with so much opinionating and so much blame and so much shame and finger pointing, which side of the vaccine controversy are you on? Which political party are you a part of, et cetera? And that just seems to be getting louder and louder. And so as we were meditating, I was reflecting on how we actually work with that, how we can be with that. And then, Scott, as you said, how we can actually return to our true nature, which is a place that's beyond good and bad and right and wrong. And I want to start by saying, in its simplest form, awakening or enlightenment is already present. It's already who and what you are. So this idea of becoming conscious is even possibly the ego or the trickster saying that there's some finish line or some destination that we need to reach. One day I will be awake. One day I can experience enlightenment. So why is this important? This is important for me because that very subtle shift remarkably changed my life, because as I began to ponder the question, what if my true nature is the awakened state? In other words, what if this isn't a journey outward up there and towards some kind of perfect state, but a recognition that perfection already exists within me? It's already the truth of and who and what you are. And when we start to ask that question, then we can start to explore what is standing in the way of us knowing that and experiencing that. I think I just put a quote out the other day that is very simple, and that is, take a deep breath, question every point of view, and remember your true nature. And so the spiritual journey for me is about returning to that place of inherent perfection. If it's true that we came into this world deeply connected with the truth of who and what we are, and then we come into a world that starts to teach us some of these things that Scott referenced: blame, shame, finger pointing. And again, as I said, it's so pronounced in our culture right now that it can be really easy to get pulled into what we might call pulled into the earth drama. So let me offer a couple of tips, because Scott did say we're going to talk about some tips and tools today. And the first one is, of course, spending time in the silence. And what is this mindfulness or meditation practice? What is the actual purpose of meditation? For me, it's really twofold. It is spending dedicated time in the silence, reconnecting with, and that's actually just the mind. We're not really disconnected from it. We don't really need to connect to it. We simply remember it. So we spend time becoming curious about that place within us, that place that's unharmed and unharmable, or you could say the energy field beneath all of the layers of trauma, drama, shame, and guilt. We spend time focusing on that and simply being present with that. And to me, the second part of mindfulness or meditation is to look at, with curiosity, all of the layers that we put on top of that. Now, we could say life put that on top of it. which is quite true, right? We come into the world, we come into family systems, maybe religious systems, school systems for sure, that start to teach us about competition. And maybe we have ideas that we're not good enough, that we're inherently broken in some way. That certainly has been my journey. And I think the reason I'm starting with the practice of meditation is meditation for me isn't about eradicating all of that. It's about becoming curious about it and noticing it. So in meditation, of course, if you're anything like me, when I first started to meditate, I would have those meditations that were filled with bliss, awe, wonder. And then I started chasing that. Oh, I want more of that. So I would sit down to meditate and I would think that the intention was to have these profound bliss experiences, which of course they can be, and those are incredible. Some meditations for me are also about really noticing, wow, I notice my inner critic or that inner narrative is really alive today. So rather than trying to fight against that, we simply recognize it for what it is. It is a thought or a series of thoughts among millions of thoughts. And we don't have to actually eradicate it or get rid of it. We can become curious about it. Maybe we question it. Maybe we offer ourselves something gentle and loving, like, isn't it interesting that I'm thinking that? Or you could even say, isn't it interesting that a program or a part of me is thinking that? I know who and what I am. This is my true nature. I'm this energy field and this frequency. And when we start to become curious about the programs, notice, as Scott said, if I have a should, or I wish I would, or why is this happening in the world? And, just to obviously, there's a lot happening in our world. So I think starting with compassion for ourselves and others is such a great first step. And then I can start to ask the question, and I think, Scott, you and I talked about this in the last show. A profoundly simple practice for me now is what gets created when and then I fill in the blank. So what gets created when I think I need to post something on social media to get my point across? What gets created when I look for the connection or the oneness with the people around me, etc. So I think that's maybe a great place to just sort of anchor our conversation today, Scott.
Yeah, thank you. I always appreciate how you remind me and remind our audience that we're already connected, right? But it's slowing down and feeling it, knowing it, remembering it. And of course, there's so many practices for that, meditation being most obvious. But, martial art form, yoga, um, time in nature, even playing tennis. There's a lot of ways that people can get out of the mind stuff and dropped back into the body and dropped back into consciousness. How So a question that comes up often is, how do we manage our compulsions?
Mm.
We have this pleasure memory, whatever it is. It might be the pleasure of Haagen-Dazs ice cream every night, or it might be something that has more challenging impact on our life. And I always love your whole thing about a brilliant strategy. It started as a brilliant strategy. Are you willing to share a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of different avenues for me to take here. I think once the compulsive moment happens, it is just to name it, it's a little bit more challenging to work with it once it's there, right? So let's use the Haagen-Dazs, because probably most of us can relate to some kind of craving for something like Haagen-Dazs. So something like ice cream. There's this sensation of like, oh, I want that pleasure, as you mentioned. You talked about brilliant strategies. So a lot of times we look at something that's a compulsive behavior, whether we call it an addiction or just some sort of compulsive behavior. And we tend to think of it as something wrong, right? Ooh, I shouldn't be doing this. And then we notice that we're shoulding again, right? I'm shoulding on myself. I shouldn't do this. How do I not do this? And then we start getting into almost like the frenzy of it. And I think when we're at that point, one of the tools is to shift from looking at it as a coping mechanism and start to look at it as a brilliant strategy, and then start to dialogue with that. not so much about the ice cream in this case, but more about what's really happening with me in this moment. And I like to ask myself the question, what is underneath what I'm experiencing? The compulsion is I want something outside of me to try to manage something happening internally. Now, that might not be super conscious. So we want to become aware of it. And then, of course, as we said, we want to, to the best of our ability, look with curiosity rather than looking through the lens of good, bad, right, wrong. Um, the deeper work is actually what happens before we have what we would call a compulsive behavior, and that's the work of healing. Now, I love that, did a show with your wonderful friend Trish, our wonderful friend Trish, and she said that at one point she realized that the word healing wasn't really it, because it's true. We don't really heal, we return to our wholeness. So we could say how we return to our wholeness in this process is looking at some of the underlying issues that are creating the compulsion, usually not in the midst of when the compulsion's happening, right? So I'm just like craving ice cream. I'm probably not going to go into a whole process of what's underneath it. As we do our work, and I'm using air quotes because work is really going back to what we said, it's looking at the programs, looking at the BS belief systems that we've developed, look at how our point of view creates our reality, heal the trauma and the disconnection that most of us have experienced because we're born on planet Earth. There's so many examples of this. One that has been up for me that a lot of people have been talking with me about. And I notice when there's a pattern, people are referencing something. A lot of people in my circle in the last week or so have been talking about gender roles and gender norms and, growing up in family systems that teach you that you have to act a certain way because of your gender. We're seeing this change in just remarkable ways, and for some maybe too much. Some people are like, this is too much what's happening. At the root of it is identity, right? We get taught that we are this personality self, and healing all of that, being able to heal that and to look at the different ways that we've disconnected from our true nature. When we do that deeper work, the compulsive behavior starts to dissipate, because I'll say it really simply: when I'm out of touch with my true nature, I look for something or someone in the world to try to feel that feeling of connection, of oneness, of euphoria. I think what we're really seeking is beyond pleasure. It's really we're seeking our own true nature. So the more we are connected with that or aware that that's who and what we are, the less we're looking to the world to try to bring us that sense of elation or what we might call an addiction.
So, how do we manage the habit part of it? Like, we are in the habit of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. We're noticing that we need to eat more and more and more to feel full. When we're conscious and we're thinking about it, maybe in meditation or when we're centered, we realize that's become a bad habit. I'm eating more and more, I'm gaining weight, I'm waking up in the morning feeling funky. So we, in our centered self, know that we need to change it.
Mm.
But evening comes around and the craving is there and we're used to it. And, whatever we say, the mind comes up with, well, fuck it, I worked hard today or whatever it is. How do we shift that part of ourself that feels entitled,
Mm.
right? Or has that, whatever story we've made that perpetuates a habit that the centered part of ourself wants to change?
Well, I want to, a wise person once said there are 3 steps to this. Step 1, awareness. Step 2, awareness. And step 3, awareness. And I really love that, because I'm aware of what gets created. I'm aware of that compulsive nature that I'm experiencing. I'm aware of where this pattern developed. I've created something, Scott, and I don't know if I've ever shared this with you or your audience, but I've also been one of those people who've said, I'm never going to be the one that has these 4 steps, 5 steps process, but I've done it more than once now. And so I have a process called the 4 steps to personal freedom. I don't know if I've shared that with your audience.
No, no, let's hear it.
Yeah, so let me go through it briefly. So we look at what we have formally called a defense mechanism or a coping strategy, right? And we know now in my work, conscious recovery, and all my work, I've reframed them to look at them as a brilliant strategy. And then I go through these 4 steps. Step 1 is gratitude. We start with being grateful for. So in this case, the ice cream, right? Because most of us are like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. As Scott, as you said, I'm waking up feeling like this sugar hangover. I don't like what's happening with my body. I don't like what it's creating. And we go into the what's wrong about it so easily. And most of us aren't conscious of that. And when we're not conscious of it, it's really running the show, right? Because we're resisting, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. So it's profound. And for some people, it's like they look at me like I've lost my mind, which of course is the goal, by the way, to lose the mind having control over us. We don't want to lose our mind, but we don't want to have it be in charge. Anyway, step 1 is gratitude. So I invite you or the person or myself to say, thank you, ice cream. I am so grateful. You have been such a good friend to me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. See if you can get not into the thought of gratitude, but the frequency of gratitude around whatever we used to call a coping mechanism, and now we call it brilliant strategy. Step 2 is to list all the ways it has helped, all the ways it has served you, and really see if you can make an exhaustive list. Well, when I was young and I felt uncomfortable, ice cream gave me a sense of comfort. Ice cream makes me feel safe. Ice cream tastes good and I love it. That part of me that really wants that little bit of high that I get from sugar. So you list all the ways, even throughout the years, it's helped you. And then step 3 is listing all the ways it has not served you, right? So with ice cream, we might say, well, I don't like what it's doing with my body. I don't have as much energy. I feel stuck. I experience a lot of shame when I promise myself I'm not going to eat it. And then the night comes around and I, go into the story of I deserve this and I eat it. So it's a cycle that's keeping me feeling icky. It's like whatever shows up for there. So again, it's gratitude, listing all the ways it has served you and then all the ways it hasn't. And then the 4th question is something that's very, very simple. And that is, what do you truly desire? And just you notice what emerges with that. It may or may not even be related to the behavior or the experience. It might not have anything to do with ice cream, for example. But what I really want is to feel safe and loved and connected. And then we just ask the very simple question, does ice cream really bring me that? And you just sit in that. Because again, what usually happens, and like you can do this with anxiety. We tend to think of anxiety, for example, as an emotion or like this experience that we're having. And when we look at it as a strategy, we start with gratitude. We look at all the ways anxiety has helped us, all the ways it has not served us. And then what do I truly desire? And then does anxiety really bring me what I truly want? And then we just sit with that. It's not about really coming up with a conclusive answer for that, but just sitting in what emerged during that process, because we move out of the good, bad, right, wrong. We move out of, I feel like I shouldn't be doing this, to a very, very profound experience of, oh my gosh, this isn't really bringing me what I truly desire. I have this profound idea, Scott, that I don't think we really change unless we want to. And so how do we get to the want to? We get down to what we truly desire. We move out of all the programs of what we should and shouldn't be doing. And when I really understand what I want, then things start to change, because I can not have the thought that this isn't bringing me that, but the experience of that.
I it's a tricky one, the part about really wanting to change. And that's why I point out the different voices. Oh, here, let me come on to that gallery view. Uh, because we do have those different voices. There is the centered voice, and the voice that's kind of knows, call it higher self, call it the God self, call it Jiminy Cricket. That's older reference for some of our friends. Um, and there's part of us that wants to indulge in whatever it is we're indulging in. And so, like you said, there's three things: awareness, awareness, and awareness. Are there any tricks or tips that come up for you in terms of how we can internally give more authority to the higher self, the centered self, as opposed to the the voice that's like, oh, what the hell? Take another hit. Oh, what the hell? Go to the store, get the bottle, whatever it is. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because as you're speaking, it's like the classic cartoon of the angel and the devil, right?
Totally.
And that's an idea that was really based in a lot of duality, and that's really important. I think it's important because as soon as there's something, like let's just have a frank conversation about something in American culture. We have a lot of shame, for example, about sex. This country was founded by Puritans, and so isn't it interesting that sex in our culture has almost gone underground? Or we look at the war on drugs, right? As soon as we went to war with drugs, we had more drug use. And so there's something really fascinating in that for me, that the more we bury something, the more it comes out in some way. And so, the idea of the devil and the angel, there's multiple ways to answer it. One is the very simple one of which one am I going to listen to and what's it going to create. The problem that I see with looking at it in that way is that's really centered in the mind, right? Like, which one do I want to listen to today? Well, I mean, let's all get honest. Sometimes that, the little devil one seems much more appealing. And so we want to get down to what we truly desire. In other words, which one are we going to feed and water? Right? Which one are we going to put focus on? And then what gets created when we do that? And that's where we go back to the mindfulness practice to get in touch with what we truly desire. But here's the piece that I think is probably the deeper work. And, I don't always like saying that because, there's a part of me that doesn't want to do the deeper work. There's a part of me that wants to like, oh, no, thank you. But let's just say the more effective, the more, transformational work that we can do is looking at it historically. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is usually these brilliant strategies developed really early in life. And I'll just give you an example in my life. There were aspects of growing up in my home that were really painful for me. There were aspects of growing up in my home that I'm so grateful for. There was so much love in some ways, but there were other ways that it felt scary for me as a kid a lot of times. So my strategy was to go in my room, close the door, and go into a fantasy world, right? And that's what I used to feel safe. Wow, how brilliant was that? I saw a picture not long ago when I was maybe 6, maybe 7, and I'm in my room playing with my cars. And gosh, there was this wave of emotion that came over me because I remembered the feeling tone that was associated with that. It felt scary out in the living room where people were angry or people were having experience rage. Let's just rage. And I would go into my room and I would play with my cars, and it took a lot of different forms, but there was a feeling of like, oh, oh, right? So that strategy of escaping, if you will, and really it showed up for me more of like removing myself when things felt difficult. And usually that wasn't physically as I got older, it was usually emotionally. I shut down, I pulled away. That strategy it was developed at a time that my little brain was developing and my spirit, my emotional life, all of that. In other words, I was doing the best I could, but that strategy became concretized in my unconscious or subconscious. And of course, I'm going to retreat when things felt scary because it worked so well at an early time in my life. So it's not about thinking our way out of it, like, oh, I shouldn't be afraid, or I shouldn't shut down, or I shouldn't eat ice cream, or I shouldn't go have another drink. It's really going back to when did this first develop? And what was created from that, and then having compassion for that part of me what did I really need then? What did that little 6-year-old really need when I ran into the room and unplugged from what felt scary? I needed love, I needed connection, I needed compassion, someone to tell me it's okay for me to be who I was and have my feelings. That's what I get to do for myself today. But really, if I'm not aware of that, then again, the unconscious is running the show, running the show. We want to get down to that precious inner child, and how do I start to care for that? And the more I do that, you see the compulsive behavior, or what we might call addiction, it starts to dissipate. It's not really about not doing the behavior. I've worked in the addiction treatment field for many years, and so many of the models teach people how to not drink and use. And it's such a limited model. It's okay, I got that. I have the tools, but how come I leave treatment, this safe place, and then all of a sudden I'm back in that compulsive behavior? Because we haven't really gotten down and started to heal that young self when all of this developed originally.
I'm multitasking while you're
Yes.
listening, so I apologize, but I have some success. I want to riff on what TJ was just saying for a moment, because obviously in my work, I'm working with people all day long on their challenging issues, and I have my own challenging issues, which TJ has helped me with, by the way. I want to say, so thank you. TJ has been my coach, and helped me through a really rough patch a couple of years ago. So I want to talk a little bit about shame. And of course, Gabor Mate has done a wonderful job of really bringing the shame conversation up. Brene Brown has done a beautiful job with it. Um, and and it's interesting because it is kind of dovetailing, TJ talking about when we're children, we're innocent. We have that innocence. And then the world happens and our reactions to the world happens and life gets hard. And then the shame comes in. We begin to believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with me, or something fundamentally wrong with the world. And oh my God, this is a crazy place, or I'm not safe. And then we start making choices that are always the best strategies that we have available at the time to make our way through this crazy world. We enter and we stay in relationships that are toxic just because at least I got somebody to hold at night, or we get addicted to alcohol or drugs, or whatever it is to leave our body because it feels so good to be out of the body and away from the problems. And then as we do that, the other part of us begins to have shame, begin to shame ourselves. Oh my God, I've become an alcoholic. Oh my God, I go from one shitty relationship to another shitty relationship. Oh my God, I'm having to pay for sex. Oh my God, someone's paying me for sex, right? I mean, all of these are the things, right? And so there's like this underlying shame growing as the years go by, more and more shame, more and more. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with this world? Meanwhile, the media is feeding us all this bullshit, bullshit images of, uh, everybody should be happy. And if you're not happy, there's something wrong with you. Everybody, all the images about sex, which is, again, all mainstream. So we're getting all this mainstream popular culture socialization that's not real. But then we start comparing ourselves to that. And, I really appreciate that TJ brought up sex. I want to say for a moment that both men and women have a very big challenge here. Women are taught that to be sexy, you need to look like a Playboy airbrushed model. And I've known many girls, many women, who were Playboy centerfolds, and they did not look like those photos, by the way. They're all airbrushed. Um, and so women have this impossible ideal of how they're supposed to look to be beautiful and sexy. Meanwhile, sadly, most boys, their sexual experience starts with 5 to 15 years of masturbating to pornography, which creates incredibly unrealistic ideas of what sex is like, what relationship between partners might look like. And then there's all the shame involved with it. Just get it over before somebody catches me. So there's so much shame that we're having to cope with and to deal with. And then very often, our brilliant strategy to avoid the shame is a practice which then gives us the temporary high or fix, but then adds to this mountain of shame that's just weighing us down more and more. So I am bringing up that issue, that challenge. Want to hear kind of what you have to say about it, TJ, and then I'll probably offer a thought as well.
Yeah, I mean, so many layers to all of the profound things you just brought into the conversation. And I want to also acknowledge, we're living in a new era as it comes to with gender. People are exploring lots of different gender identities now, and that can be confusing for some people. And I think at the root of it is, at least in part of the root of this is what you're speaking to, right? These gender norms, and I think about growing up in the 60s and 70s in Indiana. And then I imagine, because I just didn't really conform to what it was supposed to, what it was to be a boy. And so much of it's changing. Men are objectified now a lot in the same way that women were at some point and still are. And this idea that we need to conform to something. So that is an important part. And yeah, as Scott said, whether you're male, female, if you're, gender non-binary, I mean, all of the spectrum of gender, there's still a lot of messages about what we should look like, act like, be like. And right now we are looking at something deeper in this conversation to me, and that is the conversation of shame. And there is a lot of shame. I mean, I'm going to say this, and first of all, everyone, you're going to hear me say this. I love Dallas. I lived in Dallas for many years, and I do love it there. And there was an interesting statistic, and it might not still be true, but in the 80s, it was true when I lived there, that Dallas had more churches per capita than any city in America, and more topless bars. And I thought that was information, right? If we can look at that with curiosity, and I don't want to go into judgment about that, but there is something there, right? And so I'm reminded of a story of a family who had 3 children, and the oldest child was caught masturbating, and the mother said, "What are you doing?" And the oldest child denied they were doing it. And then the second child went running into the other room and closed the door. And then the third child said, "Why wouldn't I do it? It feels good." Right. So it kind of speaks to like an evolution. And there's just so many layers to this conversation, right? There's so much that comes out sideways if we're going into shame. And so just briefly, let's talk about shame for a moment. It's different than guilt. And most of us know this now. And I also always want to speak to John Bradshaw, who was one of the pioneers in the 1980s, talking about shame and family systems, and, healing the shame that binds you was his book. Guilt is, I believe I've done something wrong. Shame is, I believe I am wrong. And when I'm in the I believe I am wrong, the interesting thing is I start to actually have behavior to confirm the belief that I'm wrong. And that's what a shame spiral is. And it could be what created the more churches and more topless bars, right? Because I'm not acknowledging something and it's coming out kind of sideways, and I'm feeling bad about that. So then I'm acting that way, and then I'm feeling more shame. In other words, we've heard this how many times? Hurt people hurt people. But healed people also heal people. And I think that's really what a lot of us do. I had sexual trauma in my past, and that was something that ran the show for so long. I believed there was something fundamentally wrong with me as a sexual being. So it came out in the shadow, right? I compartmentalized. I did not have sex with people I loved. I did it in ways that I felt shame about. Now, there was nothing inherently shameful about it, but I believed it was. And so it was almost like living in the shadows. As I started to heal the parts of myself that were damaged, or I believed were damaged from that, I started to realize that my healing that, or my working through that, allowed me to help people who have also experienced that. So it was true that earlier in life, as I felt damaged, I acted more damaged in the world. And as I healed that, I started becoming a presence for other people to heal theirs as well.
I really love the story of the three children. Can I use that one because
Of
it's
course.
a great one. And what I love is that it was the youngest child who's the closer to innocence
Yeah.
who could be the most honest, right? Um, and there's a motto in my company, Love Coach Academy. Our motto is "How perfectly human." And again, I think we all recognize we're spiritual beings, but we are in animal bodies and we are having a human experience. And that human experience is hard. It's challenging at times. It's really, really challenging. And so and the other thing is the whole point of how perfectly human. Guilt, like he said, is about a choice made, a behavior. Shame is when we think it's about me, this is who I am. And it's so important for us to remember to acknowledge and differentiate between choices made and even behaviors or habits that we have a problem with versus the being itself, whether we're judging another person or whether it's judging myself. TJ might make choices that I don't like. He might even make choices I have to set a boundary with. But if I can always see TJ as an absolutely beautiful emanation of God, experiencing itself fully as TJ Woodward, and always see myself as always experiencing the world fully as this particular human being with this epigenetics, this body, this life experience. And to differentiate between those choices and habits and behaviors and the being herself. And always remember the beauty of the being. Always seek to see the beauty of the being. And we do that with our dogs, with our cats. When a dog barfs on the carpet, we just go and we clean it up lovingly because we love our dog, right? Um, but and we do it with children, but then as they get older, we become less tolerant and impatient. And then by the time it's the husband or the wife or the lover, then our patience wears thin and we don't see the divinity anymore. We just see the behavior that's driving us crazy or that bothers us or we don't like or is different than what we want. It's the same thing with myself. Right? That little boy was innocent. Why shouldn't I? It feels really yummy. It feels really good, right? And so if we can go back to that innocence, I think that's where you're directing part of this, TJ, is going back to that innocence and remembering who we truly are, as opposed to a story we've made up about our choices in our life so far.
Yeah, and it's a story and it's an experience, because it happened so early in life. So if you imagine, there's a sense of shame that was put on those children that there's something even wrong with what they were doing, right? And so there are so many layers to that. But really, the thing that's interesting about this idea of looking for the wholeness, you're really getting to the root of conscious recovery. And I know you know that, Scott, because so many of the models look for what's broken. And yes, people are carrying stories that they're broken, but it's much more than that. They're carrying in their bodies and even in their spirit the sense of brokenness, right? So, they're holding a vibration that they're broken in some way. And when we start to look for the perfection that they are, we start to look for that. The quantum field is now showing us very clearly what mystics have been saying for centuries. The observer has an effect. What I look for actually gets created. So if I'm co-signing on you being broken, Scott, if I'm working with you and you're sharing with me something about feeling broken, and I'm like, well, I'm unconsciously co-signing with it. What is broken about you and how do we fix it? We're creating more of the brokenness. I also want to speak to something that you spoke about, and we could do an entire show on the topic of boundaries, but I want to offer something with that. There was a moment in my life that was completely life-changing when someone said with such simplicity and elegant eloquence, the boundary is not for the other person, it's for me. right? And so when we talk about boundaries, first of all, a boundary in the physical world is a fence, it's a border, it's a line that someone can't cross. And when we tend to talk about boundaries, we tend to talk about, I'm going to set a boundary with this person and I'm not going to let them cross this line. The true boundary is I notice what gets created when I cross the line. So if we're in a relationship, because, Scott, it's interesting. I talk about the three root causes of addiction in conscious recovery, and one of them is toxic shame. I coined that. I didn't coin that. I wrote the book and I used that term way before all of this became super popular in our culture with toxic masculinity. And now it's toxic positivity. Like, don't be too positive. We'll also call that toxic, which I understand the root of it. So this idea of toxicity is really up in our consciousness. And here's the key. Most of what I hear people saying is, I need to remove myself from this toxic person, this toxic work environment, this toxic relationship. And yes, it's true that it may be toxic. I have a role in that. And when I recognize that it's actually happening within me, I'm not blaming myself, because people will say, this is also popular, it sounds like you're victim blaming or victim shaming. No, I'm empowering myself and anyone that is listening right now that feels like you're in some kind of toxic relationship. The power is shifting the focus from calling them toxic or even the relationship as toxic to asking the question, what are the core beliefs and the core frequency that I'm vibrating as, and what's it creating? Because, we say, why do I keep attracting unavailable people? And Scott, our friend Marianne Williamson said, I was I was on the treadmill listening to a Walkman, so it's a long time ago. And I was listening to Marianne talk about I'm doing this on the elliptical, and I was listening to her talking about relationships, and she said, when we switch from why am I attracting to why am I attracted to, everything changes. Why am I attracted to? So I take it a little further and say, what healing wants to happen within me? And so the boundary for me is, I'm no longer going to live from this core vibration and believe in my own brokenness. I'm not saying, I want to be clear, I'm not saying that other person doesn't have any culpability or accountability, but as if I'm only focusing on them, I'm missing the actual opportunity to heal. I'm not saying stay in a relationship that feels toxic or abusive, but the empowerment is unplugging from their behavior and looking at myself. And as I start to shift that, I start to make really different choices. And yes, it does seem like I'm attracting different situations, but I think it's really that I'm attracted to different situations.
Boom, boom. So much rich, beautiful things in what you said. Just noticing, when are we keeping that story going about, I'm in a toxic relationship, you are toxic, I'm toxic. It's so important for us to just make that differentiation. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Um, I want to acknowledge what's been going on for me. This little puppy is where I've been storing my videos that I need to access. And yesterday, my computer stopped being able to read it. And I had kind of noticed that, but didn't really realize until this morning, oh my gosh, I need to pull the Reverend Michael interview. Well, I went and I got my other computer, and the problem is actually with the drive. Something has happened, and neither computer can read the drive. So somewhere inside here is Reverend Michael Beckwith. He lives inside here. But fortunately, he also, I'm going to go back to gallery view, he also lives inside of my memory and TJ's memory. Now, we did promise Reverend Michael, he's on the poster. So I am going to share a memory of what Reverend Michael had to say about these topics. TJ, perhaps you can do that as well. And I have found a couple of Reverend Michael videos on YouTube that are short and look like they might be good. So I am not going to accuse my storage drive of being toxic or even broken. It's just taking a break from its normal function. Reverend Michael's been a really wonderful influence on my life. I first started going to Agape when he first started it. We were meeting in the basement of the Santa Monica Miramar Hotel on metal folding chairs. So there were like 15 or 20 of us. So it's been amazing watching what he's created and watching him over the years and interviewing him for the various television shows or whatever it was Scott Catamas was doing. And I think what I want to bring into the field that Reverend Michael keeps bringing us back to over and over, and TJ's talked about it today, is that life is good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can even, life is good. And life is always seeking to serve us. And it's so easy for us to get into the stories of what's wrong with the world, what's wrong with me, what's wrong with why this person isn't loving me the way I want to be loved. And there's a way that Reverend Michael keeps us back on track or brings us back on track of acknowledging the discomfort and the challenges, but seeing God in everything, seeing the divine in everything, even seeing divinity in that which is different from what our egoic mind tells us it should be. And that's the thing about judgment, is that every judgment we have, even if it's someone we think we know as well as our husband, our wife, our lover, our mother, our kids, it's always a projection. Mm-hmm. Every judgment we will ever have of another human being is a projection. It may or may not be true from an objective place. It's just an opinion, a projection that we have. And likewise, any thought that we have, any story about our relationship to a substance or to a person, it's a story. It's a story. And it's a story that is arguable. What's not arguable is when we can drop into gratitude and feel divinity. We can always feel divinity when we're grateful. Mm-hmm. Think about the times that something really hard was going on in your life, but then your dog comes running up to play, or your cat jumps into your lap, or you see a beautiful sunset. And it's those moments where we get out of a story of deficiency that we're in. But it doesn't mean the pain isn't real. I'm not doing a spiritual bypass right now. The pain is real. Our story about the pain is a story. It's a fiction. And we can always pivot by dropping into gratitude. Yeah. And Reverend Michael is so good at helping us to remember that through prayer, through meditation, through song. You know, that's why there's so much music at Agape. So that's kind of what I wanted to bring in, and I'm going to put the full spotlight on TJ.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it is a reminder. I posted a quote a few days ago, and it was this might be a paraphrase. I'm paraphrasing myself now, Scott. That's what it's come to. But it says something like, I stopped trying to change the world and focused on healing myself, and the world changed before my eyes. Mm-hmm. Right. And a friend of mine shared that, and then I looked at where she had shared it, and someone commented, if it were only that simple. And that statement that the person made was so powerful, because of course I go into the question, what if it is that simple? What if it is as simple as saying there's nothing inherently wrong with the world, and as I heal my projector or my lens, I start to see the world in a very different way. And what Scott's speaking to is so crucial, Gratitude can be the technology that will help us remember our true nature and to see it everywhere. When I understand there's a place within me that's unharmed and unharmable, we talk about it in so many different words, right? We might say our God self, our source energy, our innocence. Scott said that earlier, our innocence we came in with. When I remember the truth of who and what I am and I clear the lens, the projector starts to create a very different outpicturing. And so then, so someone will say to me, speaking of, someone will say, well, that's a little bit of toxic positivity, right? You're just saying that there's nothing wrong with all the stuff happening in the world. Well, what I'm really saying is, when I'm focusing on that and how wrong it is and what I need to do to change it, I create suffering within myself, but also within the situation. We talked about the war on drugs. We talked about shame as it's related to our sexual beingness. We talk about the divisiveness, politically, finger pointing. So when we unplug from that, and we start to reconnect with our true nature and realize there's a place within us that is that perfection itself, then I start to see it everywhere. And then I start to become curious how I can be the frequency of gratitude in a world that really, it seems that so desperately needs it, right? And even that's a judgment. But what I've noticed is when I tune into that, using gratitude as the frequency or the bridge, wow, things start to change. And the greatest paradox happens. Then I can become a beneficial presence on the planet. Michael Beckwith is the perfect example of this. He has done his own transformation and he has become a beacon, or he radiates that. And that's how Agape grew in the way that it did. Knowing Michael and knowing that he trusts vision, the messages that come from a very deep place, that divine idea that was agape. What I appreciate about Michael Beckwith, and I was having lunch with a friend of mine who also knows Michael yesterday, and she was saying what she appreciates most about him is his dedication to the yes. His dedication, we can catch a vision, and then it's like, oh, if it doesn't manifest in the next 3 weeks, I might lose interest. I might start focusing on something else. I might get distracted by the pint of Haagen-Dazs. Michael calls it spiritual blisscipline. When I'm in the blisscipline, when I'm disciplined to stay with my spiritual practice, and in this case, we're talking about catching a vision from our spiritual self, that deep wellspring of information, we have to stay with that, or I've had to stay with that if I want to see it manifest. We live in an instant society now. If, for like Instagram, for example, if we don't have a message in the first 4 seconds, someone just keeps scrolling. And so we've been trained, I think, to be pretty distracted. So spirituality comes in and says, this vision is very real. That was true for me with conscious recovery. This is a real vision. I'm going to stay with that. I'm going to stay holding that frequency. I'm going to stay in that knowing. I'm not going to focus on how it needs to look, but how I'm here to serve. And then, because I could, for example, with conscious recovery, I could be like, well, the addiction treatment system is broken because people are getting diagnosed and treated. And I could stay in that frequency, or I could be in the, let me be part of ushering in a new era where we're starting to look for the wholeness in the clients we work with. Let me stay with that rather than resisting. And then I unplug from trying to change the world. And I look at how I change myself. And then the greatest paradox is I start to then change the world. Lao Tzu, I think 3,000 years ago, I'm not always good with history, but said, the greatest gift I can offer the world is that of my own transformation. And those were words of wisdom thousands of years ago that are still at the very, very core of the truth of our experience as human beings having a spiritual incarnation.
Beautiful, beautiful stated. Give us a little slower that opening quote when you were paraphrasing yourself.
Yes. I shifted, or I stopped trying to change the world and focused on healing myself, and the world changed before my eyes.
Beautiful. I do believe it's a dream world. And so much of how I believe that 10% of life is what happens, And 90% of life is how we choose to respond to it. And that's really, again, back then to awareness, awareness, awareness. That's why really it's like a message in 1,000 different ways of all the different shows that I do and all the different talks that TJ gives. And, it's like, okay, how can I respond to whatever's happening in a way that's compassionate and loving and present? And may not always be comfortable, the great teachers are teachers that have seen a lot of pain. Gandhi, Jesus, these guys saw a lot of pain, experienced a lot of pain, and they still taught love, they still taught compassion. And so compassionate understanding is, for me, like, okay, how can I compassionately understand myself? And that's what I love about your conscious recovery work, TJ, is that it is all about compassionately understanding how a brilliant strategy, when we were 5 or when we were 15 or last week, served its purpose and is no longer the brilliant strategy it once was. And we compassionately understand that without making ourselves toxic or making the relationship toxic. Referencing what you said about not applying those judgmental terms to it. So I found a couple of short little Michael Beckwiths, and we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, TJ. All right, so this is from Mind Valley, which is a wonderful organization. I love the work that they do. Are you on Mind Valley yet? Are they carrying your stuff?
Not yet, but let them know, Scott. I'd love to be on Mind Valley.
Well, that's where we love Wholehearted. So remember, wholehearted.org is where you can get a lot of TJ Woodward. Anyway, this is a Mind Valley that I found on YouTube. And it's short, but it looks really good. I have not watched it, so.
This is what I want you to know. You have chosen to arrive here on earth, and you have a tremendous gift to give. As a matter of fact, you have gifts, talents, and capacities to be released. And you know what? They're gonna haunt you if you leave this planet one day before you give your gifts, activate them, and express them. And you know what else? You derive so much joy in doing this. Your bliss is the function of the activation of your potential. And so when you live to share your gifts, to uncover them, to excavate them, to activate them, to share, to shine, to sing, to dance, to release them into the world, you get the gift first, because all that energy gets to shine and express through you. Do not leave this planet before you discover, uncover, and activate what you have already brought with you. Understand this, the world, it has nothing for you. You have come bearing gifts to the world, not to take anything from it, so that you can leave a vibrational footprint that you were here, a footprint of ecstasy, a footprint of beauty and of love and of generosity, so that the world is changed because you arrived. I know this for sure. The first level is the level of when people manifest. Basically, what they're seeking to manifest is something that has been given to them by society, by their parents, something that's become popular in the world, and they use the sacred laws of manifestation to get the things that they want. And oftentimes later on discover that it wasn't really true manifestation. It wasn't really something born out of the calling of their soul. Then there's what is called true manifestation. True manifestation is when you're bringing something into expression, but along with it, you're cultivating your soul. You're becoming more yourself. So at the end of the manifestation, if it's a true manifestation, not only have you brought something into the visible world, but you've also changed. You've also transformed. True manifestation is akin to what I call the law of radiance, which is you're not trying to attract something to yourself. You're seeking to have the frequency and the vibration that you already have it, and then you radiate that frequency, and then that frequency, that vibration, then condenses itself into your needs met, condenses itself into open opportunities, beautiful opportunities. It condenses itself into possibilities. It condenses itself into new things coming into your life, but not without you becoming more you. And so Over the number of years, many people have been operating under the old law of manifesting, which is to imagine something and to let your mind embrace it, and this is to get what you want. It's old, it's outdated, it's entry level at its best. True manifestation says that what I want, I have it, and I do not want anything that doesn't come with the emergence of more me, more of my authentic self. The real life visioning process is based upon asking questions that are empowering, that empower us. What's trying to emerge in my life? What gift do I have to give? How much power can flow through me? This is how it works. Behind every problem that we have, there's a question trying to ask itself. Behind every question, there's an answer trying to be revealed. Behind every answer, there's an action trying to be taken. And behind every action, there's a way of life trying to be born. So if you're perennially stuck in disempowering questions, your perception becomes very small, you become reactionary, and the actions that you take are just busyness. Survival busyness has nothing to do with embracing a large goal or a great vision for your life. So we ask, and I implore you to ask powerful questions.
Wow, that's so powerful, Scott. I love that, there's so much synchronicity. My third book is coming out. It's Conscious Creation, and Michael actually wrote the foreword to it. And when I hear this, there's no surprise, because I've been talking for a while, and now, of course, with synchronicity. So is he about the law of radiance versus the law of attraction, and how we can manifest our life from a much deeper place. And one of the things I love about Michael with his life visioning process is that piece at the end that he's talking about with when we shift into empowering questions and we start to listen to the innate wisdom, we start to what we call manifest, which really isn't manifestation actually, because it's all available and my consciousness becomes aware. I expand my consciousness to understand that now I can actually step into a life filled with more love and connection, because the bottom line is we only can manifest or create the life we believe we deserve. One of the things I love about Michael is he says, when we catch a vision, that vision holds everything we need for its fulfillment, right? Then we activate the personality. We take the personality self, our unique skills and talents, and we use that as a way to deliver it into the world. Then we radiate that authenticity, as he said, and then we live in a new paradigm. We call it, it's new paradigm. It's the paradigm of possibilities. And then watch out, because everything is possible at that point. And then we can shift, as he so beautifully said in the beginning, not what we can get from the world, but what we can bring to the world. And then we're living a life based in service, based in frequency, based in radiating. And then we recognize the paradox that there's nothing to manifest, only everything to radiate. And then suddenly it's like, oh, everything I've ever desired that I thought was going to bring me happiness now has manifested from an understanding at a very deep level that that's already who and what I am. So I loved that clip. That was incredible, Scott.
I love the kismet, because you watched my process of, what am I going to do? And I just kind of what's something that's short on YouTube, and that's what I found. And it was beautiful. And it's 11:11, and TJ just wrapped it up beautifully. So I'm going to actually conclude us with that. But I actually do want to take people briefly to where you can get more TJ via our friend AJ and wholehearted.org. And of course, Wholehearted is who we've been collaborating with. We did a wonderful show with them last Saturday night, a week ago. And if you go to wholehearted.org and then click on contributors, you'll find TJ. And there's a lot of really wonderful stuff, a little bit about TJ. And then you've got courses here. You've got the Conscious Recovery Experience and Series. your everyday compassion talk, which is beautiful, your return to wholeness talk. So if people are wanting more TJ Woodward, I strongly encourage you to go to wholehearted.org and then just choose, still right here, Gabor Mate, Mark Lentholm, TJ Woodward, right? He's even above Marianne Williamson. So not that matters, of course. TJ, thank you so much for all the time you spend with us, with me, being on these shows, and really bringing your light, your love, your wisdom to the world. I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you, Scott. And, I will echo that right back to you. You have such a dedication. I was thinking about you today. You do the Friday evening, the Saturday evening, the Sunday morning, and so much more. And you're dedicated to that and really dedicated to being a voice for something really different than some of the other voices that are out there in media. And we can have conscious media, and each of us gets to choose where we tune into. In this case, literally. So thank you for providing a platform where people can have an experience of compassion, of love, of hope, of everything that you stand for. So thank you, and everyone watching. I so appreciate the comments, the sharing, and the connection.
Now, there's one last thing. I'm reaching for my magic wand because somebody moved it. It was TJ's birthday last week.
That's true.
And in the Catamas tradition, I always ask, and TJ didn't know I was going to do this. I've got out my magic wand, and we've got a dozen people in our Zoom room and everybody watching on Facebook. If you're willing, I would love for you to share what you want to experience in this next cycle around the sun. It's a new cycle around the sun. And as TJ shares it, let's all tap into our inner Christ consciousness, our inner Mary Magdalene, our inner whatever you might call it, and know it to be so.
The word that came through so clearly is freedom, a deeper level of freedom. Certainly I could say freedom for me as an individual, and freedom for the planet, and freedom for the cosmos. And not in the classic sense of like freedom from some kind of force that's keeping me bounded or in bondage, but freedom for all of us to recognize that we are the powerful creator, and that we are essentially whole and perfect, and that we can radiate this into the world. So that's really what I want for each of us in this coming year, this belief in the time, in the calendar, but really freedom. Freedom is the word.
Beautiful. Well, that's blessings, maximum grace and freedom for TJ and our world. Thank you, TJ.
Thank you, Scott.
Have a beautiful Sacred Sunday. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please share this out. It's a wonderful way to get more people aware of TJ, myself, Dr. Michael, and just some of these thoughts and ideas.